Hello, everyone, and good morning. I hate that we are doing this again on a Tuesday, but I am trying to take some of my own advice in ruthlessly eliminating hurry, which I guess is not really my own advice, but Ford's, as he's written a few times about here in the book. I had the chance to record this yesterday. I had some kind of crazy things go on, and so instead of trying to just hurry and get it done, I put it off till today so that I could really focus on it a bit more. And so here I am. Thanks for the grace that you're giving me to do this on Tuesday morning instead of Monday. I guess I ask for grace maybe in hopes that you'll give it to me. I feel confident you will. Listen, this is going to be maybe a shorter reflection, though, here on chapter 6 about the Noonday Demon, in which we talk about our distractible selves. The quotes right here on page 116 is, "The opportunity which God sends does not wake up him who is sleeping, distracted from distraction by distraction," and also out of Psalm 91:6. The destruction that wastes at noonday is the quote there. High noon in the course of hours is called sext. In the monastery, it is a break from work to eat and serve and pray together and to listen as someone reads out loud. It is the hour of fervor and commitment, but it is also the hour of temptation to laziness and despair, the hour of the noonday devil as well as of intensity. Noonday, of course, represents the sun being at its highest point, middle of the day. We don't quite order our lives according to the movement of the sun in the way that people have for the really longevity of human history. It's kind of it's a strange thing to me how clocks have really radically transformed our world over these last 100 to 200 years. That's a massive change that has come about relatively recently when you put it in the scope of human history, because when we go to other parts of the world, I remember living in parts of Kenya and Ghana and also just in other places too, even throughout Central America, where the clock doesn't necessarily rule the day in the way that it does here. You wake up when sun rises, and you go to sleep shortly after sun goes down. I may have shared this story before, so forgive me if I have, but when I was in Kenya, I was I guess a recently graduated college student, or I was graduating that semester. And so I was really at like peak fitness. I played a lot of sports and went to the college gym, and I'd gotten into the routine of running. And I preferred to run at night. And that may be weird, but it was just the end of my day. I could go and get a run in, and I enjoyed that. And so I never forget talking about that with some of the people there in Kenya, that I wanted to maybe try and go on some runs. And they just kind of looked at me and said, "Well, I don't know. Being out by yourself can be dangerous, but not only that, you're definitely not running out at night." And I said, "Well, why not?" And they said, "Hyenas come out at night." There are all kinds of bad things that happen in the night. We don't have control over the darkness and the way that you do there in the United States. And so I made sure to get my runs in the morning, the few times that I was able to do it. And so when we talk about these divine hours, that's really the movement of the day that is being referred to, because this is when the Benedictine order would have been created. It's how they would have operated, and it's how they still operate today. It's just different than how we operate today. I've written down a few words that stood out to me. I think this is the best way to go about this study online when I don't have the discussion component like I've had in the past when you're sitting in front of me. And so I just want to mention a few of these words to you now. The first is talking about divine interruptions. This is to say that all interruptions that happen in our lives are not bad. Sometimes we are not planning what God is planning for us, and the Lord will interrupt or intervene in our lives and interfere with our lives to such a degree that we lose focus entirely on what we had been planning on doing for the day. And this can be frustrating for us because we are planners, we are controllers, but there is a such thing as a kind of divine or holy distraction. I think maybe the word, though, that Leighton Ford would prefer is to kind of continue to allow distraction to be something that is mostly negative. It's something that we want to be conscious of, whereas an interruption does not always mean that it's something negative. A holy interruption would certainly be a time in which God is shaking you, waking you up to pay attention to something that God is calling out to you for the day. And sometimes that can happen daily, and sometimes not. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule as to how often God provides these kinds of holy interruptions. But I do remember, as a pastor in training at Mountain View United Methodist Church up in Marietta, I do remember walking into my pastor's office that day, who I was working for, and we ended up talking for an hour or so in his office. And I just said, "Hey, I'm really sorry for just barging in here, and I'm sure you had other things planned for the day. I'm sorry to distract you from what you were doing." And he said, "I had a great mentor who once told me, Josh, that oftentimes the ministry you're working for tends to happen in the distractions." Meaning that sometimes, we plan our plans, and we're doing good work with our plans. It's not to say don't have any plans. That's the opposite of what I'm trying to say. Have your plans, but make way and prepare for the holy interruptions and distractions that God may be putting in your life, that are going to burst in throughout the day. I wonder how many of you have had these kinds of distractions. Some of you may have had someone come to live with you that you hadn't anticipated, possibly a friend or a parent or a child or grandchild. Some of you may have had changes in your jobs where you expected to go this way and you got a phone call that led you this way. You may have moved to Lizella or Macon as a distraction. You were not expecting to ever be here, but the Lord may still be at work within that. These are divine interruptions that I think is useful for us to pay attention to as Christians. I really thought this poem, and I honestly was off-put by it at first. I suppose it would be considered a poem that talked about the ministry or the spirit that would have become stillborn in Mary and Joseph had they said no to God. God approaches both Mary and Joseph in the form of an angel, saying that they're going to bear this child. And what if Joseph said no and kind of went his own way, and Mary, did something to stop the plan, or whatever. The poem says, "Would not the Christ child have been born anyway?" I think that's to say that God's justice is going to happen as it does. There is really no deterring God's plan from happening when God really intends for that thing to happen. So would not the Christ child have been born anyway, but what would have been stillborn in them had they said no? It's a haunting question for me, because I am afraid that I have said no many times, probably, to things that the Lord has called me to. Another quote of Leighton Ford's is, he was talking about the world being run by tired people. And that is a scary thought. You got to think of, when I watch these presidents President Trump and possible President-elect Joe Biden, I think sometimes when I see them walking on these stages, how tired they look. How many of you have ever noticed that before? They've got to be workhorses and machines to be able to stay on these campaign trails in the way that they do. It's really an interesting and fascinating thing to watch, because both of them are well into their 70s now. But it's also kind of a scary thought to think of how many people are running our country on coffee and Red Bull, energy drinks, and possibly medicine and drugs, and other kinds of substances and things that whenever they would really be better off just by going and catching up on some sleep. Pay attention to your fuel. Pay attention to your own energy is partially what this is saying. Is noonday is when you have the temptation to move in towards a time of laziness, that 12 to 2 o'clock time is when people's just the work ethic kind of goes from here to here as people are making transitions after lunch and things of that sort. Last, I want to make a quick note on sin and grace as Leighton Ford defines it. As a pastor, I'm always interested in finding new ways to define these old terms of sin and grace and salvation, whatever, because I don't know that there's really any way that any one singular definition can accurately sum up what's intended to be meant by these words that are kind of littered throughout Scripture. For Ford, in the context of this book, sin is simply an inattentiveness, not paying attention to God. It's to say that when we are distracted from the will of God, the path of God, that is living into the temptation of sin. Whereas grace is the recognition that there is nothing that we can do to make God love us more, and there is nothing that we can make God do to love us less. I think both of these definitions are well within the larger framework of what we teach and preach as sin and grace. It's this understanding that God is at work for you constantly, whenever you're aware of it and whenever you're not. The Noonday Demon strikes within the timeline of our lives, kind of when we are in the middle of our stride, the middle of our race. I guess I would tend to think 30s, 40s, 50s, when you're thinking career, when you begin to possibly lose focus, on the goal of what all began with this passion of your work or your training or your job or whatever. But the Noonday Demon, I think, strikes at each of us every day as we are made comfortable and complicit with the sometimes lackluster performance of things around us because we've gotten comfortable with it. And so let us as Christians call ourselves to attention and pay attention to what God is calling us to today. I hope this message and this lesson has been a blessing to you. It certainly is a blessing to me. Thank you for following along with me. Listen, next week, this is important, next week, make sure that you read the interlude and chapter 7. It's going to be a longer section, I'm aware, but I'm trying to get through this study by the beginning of December, which will put us at having 3 weeks to go because we're going to do the same thing with the epilogue, and I think it's chapter 9. So we got chapter 7, chapter 8, and chapter 9 basically to go. So 3 more weeks of this. Thank you for following along these 6 weeks, 7 weeks so far. And I hope you're blessed. Hope you're well. Don't forget to feel free to chime into the comments below. And also don't feel afraid to respond to each other. That's why we've got this thing open. At the beginning of this Bible study, I thought about doing some different formats with the actual Bible study itself. I'm going to hold tight to doing it this way week to week. It may be that another Bible study in the future we add into some of those other discussion elements, but for now I think this is the best way to go. Take a look at the discussion prompts that are on the side or the bottom if you're if you're on your phone versus on the computer. Again, I hope you're well, be blessed. Catch you next week.